In March 2014, as a result of the political crisis in Ukraine, Crimea was annexed. The pretext for annexation was the protection of the Russian-speaking population, as well as the return of ancestral lands to Russia. However, as you understand, these public slogans were not the true reasons for what happened. I have already talked on the channel about the Crimea remained Ukraine. So in this video we will discuss why Russia annexed Crimea and why Crimea is so important. The first and most important reason for Crimea becoming the object of annexation was the placement of Russian military forces in Crimea. Since Soviet times, the Crimean peninsula has been an important strategic point for military deployment. Even then, serious military infrastructure was created on the peninsula. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, Crimea remained part of Ukraine, but the military infrastructure remained under the control of the new Ukrainian authorities. The issue of the presence of Russian military and the naval fleet in Crimea became one of the key points in Russian-Ukrainian relations in the 1990s. Eventually, Ukraine allowed the presence of the Russian fleet in Crimea through a 1997 agreement signed during Kuchma's presidency, although the initial agreements were signed under Kravchuk. In addition to the fleet, Russia was allowed to station up to 25,000 troops, armaments, build strategic facilities, and so on in Crimea. Initially, the agreement was signed until 2017, but it was extended during Yanukovych's presidency until 2042 in exchange for discounted gas prices. Despite Crimea being part of Ukraine, Russia still stationed its armed forces there, thereby controlling the Black Sea basin. The Crimean peninsula has an ideal position for this. So, returning to the year 2014, when there was a change of power in Ukraine, the Russian government felt threatened by this situation. Pro-European forces came to power, aimed at joining the European Union and integrating with the Western countries. Russia, obviously feeling the risk, decided to finally resolve the issue of Crimea and consolidate its influence on the peninsula by annexing it. This event reduced the threat of Russian troops leaving Crimea to zero. Moreover, after annexation, Russia has no restriction on deploying military force and is increasing its military potential in Crimea. As I mentioned earlier, Crimea has strategic importance in the Black Sea, which is accessed by NATO countries such as Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania. The second reason is a threat from NATO countries. First, since the late 1990s, Russia became concerned about NATO's expansion eastward. In 1999, former Soviet allies Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic joined NATO. In 2004, in addition to former Soviet allies such as Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia, 3 former Soviet republics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, also joined NATO. In general, Russia's concerns about other post-Soviet countries joining NATO were quite real, and with Ukraine turning to the west, the likelihood of such an event increased dramatically. Returning to the question of Crimea, what was Russia afraid of? Well, firstly, Ukraine joining NATO. This would mean that Russian military personnel would no longer be able to be in Crimea, as only alliance member countries can have military bases on NATO member territory. Overall, Russia is extremely concerned about NATO's advance towards its borders. Ukraine joining NATO would seriously question the security of Russian borders. Secondly, with Ukraine's accession to NATO, theoretically, NATO forces could have occupied the Crimean peninsula, allowing them to fully control the Black Sea. Annexation of Crimea easily resolved these two issues. Crimea remained under full control of Russia, and decisions of the Ukrainian authorities ceased to influence it. Maintaining control over Crimea and military bases became top priorities. Crimea, under Russian control, no longer faced the risk of falling into NATO's hands and establishing control over it. Lastly, the annexation of Crimea resolved another key issue for Russia, namely Ukraine's accession to NATO. Despite negotiations between Ukraine and NATO countries, territorial disputes emerged with the annexation of Crimea, and later the war in Donbass, and then the war within all of Ukraine further cast doubt on Ukraine's NATO membership. As we see, after 10 years, the question of Ukrainian succession to NATO has not progressed significantly. It seems that the precedent was also used in Georgia. The Georgian authorities in 2008 were unable to regain control over the lost territories. Thus, the annexation of Crimea became the optimal solution to prevent further NATO expansion to the east. The third important reason is the boost in the current government's ratings. In the year 2013, Putin's and his party's United Russia ratings were quite low. From 2011 to 2013, Russia witnessed some of the largest protests in its history. Putin's and his team's ratings were not in the best position. During these years, his rating fluctuated around 50–60%, the lowest in all his previous years of rule. The decline in ratings began after many citizens of Russia realized the usurpation of power, which also led to a slowdown in economic growth. For example, back in 2013, before the imposition of sanctions, with normal relations with Western countries and high oil prices, Russia's GDP grew by less than 2%, which was even below the average global growth rates. For comparison, in all the 0 years, except for 2009, when the global crisis occurred, Russia averaged growth rates of 5–7% per year, instilling optimism among its citizens, and their real incomes were rising every year. The annexation of Crimea became an excellent catalyst for nationwide affection for Putin, and his approval rating hit record highs. The small victorious war without the use of weapons bore fruit, even despite the sharply deteriorating economic situation in the country caused by sanctions and the collapse of oil prices. Putin's ratings significantly increased. On all TV channels, they only talked about Putin's historic mission and the return of Crimea to its home. And if finally in 2013 Putin's rating was around 60%, and after the annexation of Crimea it effectively rose to 90%. The euphoria over Crimea gave a significant boost to Putin and his team, and the ratings remained consistently high until the next presidential election in 2018, in which Putin again emerged victorious. However, after that, the urgent problems of Russian citizens returned to the agenda, and the rating began to decline rapidly. Nevertheless, this provided an excellent opportunity to strengthen Putin's power. So, in the event of Crimea returning to Ukraine, it would be considered a major defeat for Putin and a demonstration of Russia's weakness. The fourth reason, which I mentioned briefly, is the expansion or preservation of Russia's sphere of influence. The annexation of Crimea was precisely dictated by this necessity, as were a number of other post-Soviet conflicts. After Yanukovych fled Ukraine, the Russian government realized that they were losing control over Ukraine, and along with it, their sphere of influence. The new Ukrainian authorities were pro-European and thus weakened. The annexation of Crimea became an attempt to secure at least part of Ukrainian territories that would not slip out of Russia's sphere of influence. Also, the Crimean issue became a sore point for the entire Ukraine, hindering its serious integration into the European community. A similar tactic was used in Georgia when it pursued a pro-European course, which led to the final alienation of two of its regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Overall, it's worth noting Putin's personal sentiment regarding the collapse of the Soviet Union. Putin has repeatedly called the collapse of the Union a geopolitical catastrophe and has been actively trying to revive a similar format of relations. However, not all post-Soviet countries want this. In conclusion, it can be said that Crimea occupies a special place in Russian politics. The annexation of Crimea finally put an end to the issue of deploying Russian military forces in Crimea, secured the peninsula from NATO, boosted Putin's rating, and also became an attempt to preserve Russia's sphere of influence, at least at this format. That's it for now. Thank you for watching, don't forget to like and comment this video. As well as on my channel I have other interesting videos about Russia and the Soviet Union, so you can watch them to know better my country. See you!